Okay, so we're on chapter Tetzain 16. Okay, for some reason, this one is in the wrong place. Okay, so just kind of a little bit of a recap of what we did last week. We spoke about this parable. We talked about that Yerushalayim is compared to this baby that was left alone and was kind of adopted by somebody. In this case, Yerushalayim was adopted by God, chosen by God, taken care of, raised by God, and everything. And even though up until verse 14, which is where we stopped, everything seems like okay, right? God sees the that baby in blood, covered with blood, deserted in the field, taken care of, tells the baby, bedamai chai, bedamai chai. Everything will be great. Takes, like, there's a marriage there later on. She grows up, blah, blah, blah. Great. Everything is fine. And she becomes beautiful. And just look at the last couple of psukim over there. From Pasuk Yud, V'al bishech rikma, v'nalech tachash, been clothed, expensive stuff, jewelry, and gold and silver and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. But Tifi b'meod meod, became very beautiful and very successful, even for kingship. Vayetzelach, Pasuk Yudalet, Vayetzelach Shem bagoim b'yofyech, ki kalil hu, b'hadari asher samti alaych neum Adonai Elohim. Everything looks great, right? Everything looks great, and then so we have this anticipation that there's going to be some sort of a hakarat hatov. There's going to be some sort of a acknowledging that, all the effort, everything that was done for Yerushalayim, or that baby, whatever, that became into a woman, a young woman. However, here's the surprise, and everything is going to take a totally different turn. So even though God invested and raised that baby, there's going to be a tremendous disappointment. Now, the verses that we're going to deal with today are some of the worst or the most difficult verses in the entire Tanakh. And they describe the unfaithfulness, but it's not only unfaithfulness of that baby, that young lady, whatever, it's Yerushalayim, but she becomes a prostitute. And so we're dealing with psukim 15 through 34, but in order so it's going to make sense, we're going to divide it into the 4 sections, okay? So we're going to look at, I'm going to start with the first one. So I'm looking at 15 through 19. Perek Tetzain. Yeah, Perek Tetzain. I'm starting with Pasuk Tetvav. ותבטחי ביופייך ותזני על שמך, ותשפכי את תזנותייך על כל עובר לו יהי, ותקחי מבגדייך ותעשי לך במות אלוהות, ותזני עליהם לא באות ולא יהיה, ותקחי כלי תפארתך מזהבי ומכספי אשר נתתי לך, ותעשי לך צלמי זכר ותזני בם, ותקחי את בגדי רקמתך ותכסים, ושמני וכתרתי נתת לפניהם, ולחמי אשר נתתי לך סולת ושמן ודבש האכלתיך ונתתיהו לפניהם לריח ניחוח ויהי נאום אדוני אלוהים. Starting from 15. But you trusted in your beauty and you became, how you read that word? Exactly, licentious. Because, I don't know that word. Because of your fame, you poured forth your Okay, Steve, help me. I can deal with that. Harlot upon every passerby to be his. So you took off your garments and made for yourself. Okay, Shelley, you just won that. Okay, you keep reading. Kente.
This should not have been, and shall not occur. Then you took your beautiful objects from my gold and my silver that I gave you, and made yourself nails to the and were ascended with them. Took your embroidered garments and covered them. So at night you sent for them.
Okay, so this young woman, obviously parable for Yerushalayim, is taking advantage of her beauty, the fact that she is so beautiful for the purpose of prostitution, but in a very radical way. Al kol over luye, any passing by, anyone. So what is that reference to? The prostitution is a reference to the Avodah Zarah, idol worshiping, right? Because that manifests itself with building the bamot and bringing all those sacrifices. Not only that, she takes all the goodness that God has bestowed upon that baby during the early years and use it in the opposite way, use the goodness in the opposite way, in a radical way of prostitution, which is the Avodah Zarah. So it's not only that we're talking about being unfaithful, but we're talking about using exactly what she got for that particular purpose, like the clothes and then whatever, all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of like, okay. Now, I'm going to look at Psukim Kaf until Kaf Gimel, 20 to 23. Here's going to be an emphasis on particular type of Avodah Zarah. ותקחי את בנייך ואת בנותייך אשר ילדת לי, ותזבחים להם לאכול המעט מתזנותייך, ותשחטי את בניי ותתננים והעביר אותם להם, ואת כל תועבותייך ותזנותייך לא זכרת את ימי נעורייך בהיותך עירום ועריה מתבוססת בדמך היית, ויהי אחרי כל רעתך אוי אוי לך נאום אדוני אלוהים. And you know, every time that we have this נאום אדוני אלוהים, it's kind of a pause, right? So this is why I divided it into 4 sections. Okay, Shelley. 20.
Then he took his sons and his daughters, and his stockmen, he slaughtered for them dead. When your heart is so trivial that see my children, take them away by accident open before your eyes, and with all your abominations and your harlot, not committed.
Okay, so now the description is kind of closer to the nimshal, to what we learned from it, and it's very specific what we're talking about, the molech. If you remember, we talked about that. The molech was that form of worship in which people sacrifice their children. Okay, so this is more specific here. Now, what's interesting here, that in the end of this particular little paragraph, there's a unusual sentence, Oy oy lach neum Adonai Elohim. It's like the prophet, he can't like contain it. He's like, you know, because he's supposed to give the description now. He's not supposed to comment on that. And yet, that's exactly what he's doing. He is in the middle of the mashal of the parable, parable. He's in the middle of that, but he's kind of like, he can't control himself, and he goes into the punishment. And he says, "Oy, oy, lach." Okay? Now we're going to go into the next part, 24 to 29. Going to go back to the description of this obsessiveness with the prostitution, and going to add, and the Navi is going to add another dimension of it. Okay? So I'm in 24. ותבני לך גב ותעשי לך רמה בכל רחוב, אל כל ראש דרך בנית רמתך, ותתעבי את יופייך, ותפסקי את רגלייך לכל עובר, ותרבי את הזנותייך, ותזני אל בני מצרים שכנייך גדלי בשר, ותרבי את הזנותך להכיסני. והנה נתתי ידי עלייך, ואקרא חוקך, ואתנך בנפש שונאותייך, בנות פלישתים, הנכלמות מדרכך זימה. ותזני אל בני אשור מבלי שובעותך, ותזנים וגם לא שבעת. ותרבי את הזנותייך אל ארץ כנען קסדימה, וגם בזאת לא שבעת. Okay?
And you multiply your policy. You are like tensions with the son of weight of flesh, and you multiply your policy to broken. Then behold, I stretched out my hand against the roof of the minister alive. Then I delivered to the will of those who hate the daughters of the Philistines, who were ashamed of the were licentious with the sons of Assyria. Were not saved. Were licentious with them, yet still not saved. Then you multiply your policy for the land for the Chaldeans, and even with this, not saved.
Okay. A couple of words that are kind of like we need to explain. In Pasuk Kaf Daled, we have Vativni lach gav, vata'asi lach rama. Gav. So in modern Hebrew, we're going to say back, but it's actually, in this context, from the word gova. Okay? I don't remember, like, when we were kids, like, so the middle, like, bar of the bicycle was rama also, right? So it's gova, gav, rama. So that means the prostitution, like those acts, took place on a high public places, right? Later on, we see rechov. Rechov is not only street, it's a public place. Okay? So that means, so it was not done, so to say, in private, but rather in public and high places. If you remember, we mentioned that Amnon is sleeping with David's concubines. What? No, not Amnon, not Amnon. That's not Amnon. Not Amnon. Will come to me in a second. One of David's sons that had Avshalom. Thank you. Avshalom takes David's concubines and he sleeps with them specifically on the roof, so can everybody see that, right? So the idea is not only not only the act itself, but rather it's doing it in public. It's like davka, right? It makes it even worse. Then Eretz Kasdima. What's Eretz Kasdima? That we see in Pasuk of Tet. Kasdima, the Kasdim. Kasdim is Babylon. Okay, so we have Mitzrayim. Then we have Plishtim, Ashur, and Bavel. Okay, we have references to those four. Okay, we'll get to that in a second. This is like where Daniel's stuff becomes relevant. So first of all, we have got a double meaning here. In the simple reading is that not only with her own people, she was not only with her own people, but also with strangers, other nations. Mitzrayim, Ashur, Bavel, that's the hint for the sin of Malchei Yehuda. What is the sin of
Equal opportunity harlotry.
Okay, but to be more specifically, it's what the kings of Yehuda, what? No, it was all sorts of agreements that they made with Mitzrayim, with Ashur. Okay, they had treaties with those nations, started already in the times of Chizkiyahu, and Yehoiakim did that also, and then Tzidkiyahu. And then when it comes to Ashur, he approached Aram. So every time, instead of dealing with the enemies, instead of trying to work it out with your own people, like for example, Yehuda to approach Malchut Yisrael, what they do is they go to the other nations, trying to work out some sort of a deal against a common enemy. And why this is so bad? We'll see in a minute. Like he's going to talk about that. Specifically, it was yes, but they also they well, that's for sure. But I'm saying, like in the times of the kings of Yehuda, not only like it's not that like, okay, listen, we have a common enemy, let's join forces and yes, but they had to bribe them. They bought it with tremendous amount of gold and silver and all that kind of stuff, and many times it was from the temple. Okay.
Am I mistaken that Yahoo, one of the prophets, encouraged them to make a treaty?
That's much later on, though.
And they didn't make a treaty.
But that's much later on when it was like done.
Later.
Yeah.
And the treaty were not equal.
So right. So here, if you look at so these are our psukim here. The first one, you can read the English, but in Egypt, when it comes to Egypt, so Dan wrote harlotry, a metaphor for alliance with foreign nations. So we have that metaphor, but when it comes to Egypt, so you look, there's also Ezekiel, but also you can go into the books of Kings and see that. And same goes for Ashur. So you can, if you want, I think it's fascinating to look through those psukim. Maybe we're going to have a chance to do that later. I just want to make sure that we're going to have a chance to cover all those, all our chapter. Okay, so these are like references to those psukim all over that tells us about those treaties that they made, the kingdom made with the other nations. So, and here, by the way, we have another pasuk that we go from the description into the punishment. What is, and it says, etc. So what is the punishment? The punishment is that Yerushalayim is going to be given in the hands of its enemies. That even those enemies that were known for their idol worshiping and all that bad stuff that they do, they feel like kind of like uncomfortable with that. Meaning, Yerushalayim is even worse than those nations. That's kind of like the message. And here what comes like the fourth part of this description of all that, all those actions. Psukim 30 to 34. מה אמולה ליבתך נאום אדוני אלוהים בעשותך את כל אלה מעשה אישה זונה שלטת בבנותייך גבך בראש כל דרך, ורמתך עשית בכל רחוב, ולא היית כזונה לקלס אתנן, האישה המנאפת, תחת אישה תיקח את זרים, וכל זונות ידנו נדה, ואת נתת את נדנייך לכל מאהבייך, ותשחטי אותם, לבוא אלייך מסביב בתזנותייך, ויהיבך הפך מן אנשים בתזנותייך, ואחרייך לא זונה, ובתיתך אתנן, ואתנן לא ניתן לך, ותהי להפך. Shelley? 30 to 34. Or Steve.
How generous is your heart? Where is the Lord? Hashem Elohim. And you only say, you always say, of the woman. You fill your enemy's place and it's prosperous. You are not like the harlot, dragged to back of you, overthrown his wife. Take strangers and place them in husband. All harlots, gifts are given, but you, because you good gifts to all your character. Drive them to come to you from all around the home. So with you, in the opposite of the gifts of the harlot. And after you, you'll never be the harlot. And at the gate of truth, he will not give it to you. Thus has he become God.
Okay, so the emphasis here is the abnormality of that act of prostitution. Usually, what's the way it works? It's the harlot that gets the money. But here, she pays them. She gives them the money so they will be with her. Okay? And of course. So it's even worse because she's the one that even paying. Okay? And this is what he says, Vatehi lehefech. It's supposed to be the opposite. Okay? And what he is referencing to is to the gifts that the kings of Yehuda gave to the other rulers for those treaties, silver and gold and all that kind of stuff. Achaz, you know, it says, "Vaikach Achaz et hakesef et hazahav, Beit Adonai ve'otzrot Beit HaMelech, vayishlach lemelech Ashur shochad." Achaz took all the gold and whatever from the treasury, sent it as a bribery to the king of Ashur. Same goes for Yechezkel. ויעשה מלך אשור על חזקיהו מלך 300 כיכר כסף או 30 כיכר כסף. כל הכסף הנמצא בית אדוני ואוצרות בית המלך. And then, בעת ההיא קיצץ חזקיהו את דלתות היכל אדוני ואת העומדות אשר ציפה חזקיהו מלך יהודה ויתנו למלך. חזקיהו, the king of Yehuda, takes from the treasury the gold and the doors of the temple that are made of gold, and he gives them to Ashur as a bribery. Okay? And Yehoiakim did something similar with Paro, the king of Mitzrayim, Egypt. Paro Necho, that was his name, whatever. He gave him also as a bribery so they can have that tree. So, if I'm going to summarize all that, all those difficult psukim, there are 4 dimensions, 4 angles to describe the actions of Yerushalayim. First of all, it's the goodness and all that stuff that God gave that baby was used in the opposite way, to betray. It's the same stuff. It's the gold and the silver and the embroidery and all that kind of stuff. So that's number one. Number two, it's the molech, is sacrificing the children. Number three is making those treaties with the foreign nations. And number four is paying them for that. So those are the four dimensions that he's highlighting. And because it's so severe, the punishment is going to be also severe, and the description of the punishment is going to be so severe, just like the description of the actions. Okay, so let's go into the punishment. And the opening is very, very difficult. Pasuk lamed hey, lachen zona shim'i dvar Adonai. Therefore, harlot, hear the word of God. Okay, now other prophets use that, use the word harlot also, like against the Jewish people, but only as a comparison, not as a direct naming. Right? Yeshayahu says, Eicha hayta lezona kirya ne'emana. Right? So it describes Yerushalayim. Yirmiyahu also says, Umetzach isha zona hayalach me'anti kalem. Again, it compares Yerushalayim to a woman.
Isn't it interesting, the sexist point of view, that all of these kings, only one woman that was the queen.
Yes.
All of them are men, and the whole parable is about women. Doesn't say how this is the way it is.
Well, kings were men.
No.
That's just a fact.
But no,
Yes.
striking. 2023 was it? Sorry.
Okay. Noted. But anyway, but this idea of calling the city, calling Yerushalayim harlot, like naming that, this is the only time we see it in the whole Bible. That's what I'm saying, like in a direct way. Okay, so let's go into that. I'm going to read verses 36 through 43. כה אמר אדוני אלוהים, יער אני שפך נחושתך ותגלה ערוותך בתזנותייך על מי אהבייך, ועל כל גילולי תועבותייך וחדמי בנייך אשר נתת להם, לכן הנני מקבץ את כל מי אהבייך אשר ערבת עליהם, ואת כל אשר אהבת, על כל אשר שנאת, וקיבצתי אותם עלייך מסביב וגילתי ערוותך עליהם, וראו את כל ערוותך, ושפטתיך משפטי נואפות ושופכות דם, ונתתיך דם חמה וקינה, ונתתי אותך בידם והרסו גבך וניצור ארמותייך, והפשיטו אותך בגדייך ולקחו כלי תפארתך והניחוך עירום ועריה, והעלו עלייך קהל ורגמו אותך באבן ובתוכך בחרבותם, ושרפו בתייך באש ועשו בך שפטים לעיני נשים רבות, והשבתיך מזונה וגם אתנן לא תתני עוד, והניחותי חמתי בך ושרה קנאתי ממך ושקטתי ולא אכעס עוד. And the last pasuk, יען אשר לא זכרת את ימי נעורייך ותרגזי לי בכל אלה, וגם אני דרכך בראש נתתי נאום אדוני אלוהים, ולא עשית את הזימה על כל תועבותייך. Okay. Sally.
Therefore, O harlot, hear the word of Hashem. Thus said the Lord Hashem Elohim. Cause your shame was poured out others by all your harlots. It is arrogant, because it will be about the soul of others. And in accordance with the blood of your therefore, behold, I will grant only heaven, whom you have been all who dwell together. with all whom you hate. I will gather them to you from all around, cover your nations. I will administer upon you the judgment of the stewards of blood, and deliver you the blood of wrath. Then I will place you in the head, their head. They will tear down your enemy's place. They will strip you of your clothes and take your beautiful bed. They will make it bare. They will bring up in the temple state. They will help you to stone and pierce you. Burn after your house. Stop you from being a harlot, and you will never want to taste you. Then I will leave my fury that has been upon you, and my jealousy will turn away from you. Then I will be at rest and not complain. This will befall you, but not remember the days of issue, but I beg with you. So behold, I also will place you away upon your head. The word of the Lord Hashem Elohim.
Okay, so both in the description of the actions and in the punishment and all that kind of stuff, we can see, first of all, it's the severe, really radical language, something that we don't see the entire Tanakh, we don't see anything like that. And the idea here is, first of all, is to shock the people. Right, we talked about that yechezkel is doing all sorts of actions in the beginning to get his message across because people are not listening, so visuals. And at some point he changed tactics and he started with the parable of the vine that we talked about last week. And this is also another parable, and later on there's going to be a bunch of others. And the idea is, I think here, it's the language that's supposed to make that impact. It's really difficult, radical language that is supposed to shock the people and create an impact. That's number one. Number two, the essence of the punishment here is midah keneged midah. How you say it in English?
An eye for an eye.
An eye for a measure for measure. Right? So the strangers with which the harlot was, they are the same ones that are going to hurt her. They're the ones who are going to take off her clothes, stone her, and cut her with a sword, cut her up with a sword. So that little baby, deserted baby that started naked, erom ve'eria, is going to end up, look at Pasuk Lamed Tet, 39, exactly the same language, erom ve'eria. Ve'inichuch erom ve'eria, naked. Is making the connection between the first part of the chapter to here. There's a correlation, direct correlation between the actions and the punishment. For the molech, the bloodshed, all the blood that was spilled, the children's blood, because of the molech, right? It says, your own Yerushalayim, your own blood is going to be shed. Untatich dam chema vekina. So he creates a parallel and a connection, direct connection between the actions and the punishment. Every child psychologist will tell you that when you want to give a punishment to your child, it has to have a correlation. There's got to be a connection, direct connection between the action and the punishment. Okay? Now, in spite of all those difficult descriptions, we see that there's no intention that the girl is going to die. Because first of all, we see that towards the end that she's still alive. Not only that, God is no longer angry. And that's part of also, like, part of the process, right? So there's a sin, right? They do like horrible things, whatever, there's sin. So there's the musar, right? You need to tell. And by the way, that translates into the Chot Tshuva. The Rambam explains that one needs to understand what was wrong. You can't punish somebody without explaining what. So this is a good example, right? The Navi explained exactly what went wrong, why this is so terrible. Therefore, the punishment has a direct correlation to the act, and then you have to let it go. Once you punish, you can't stay angry. Otherwise, there's no point of punishing. Part of the reason of the punishment, part of it, not the whole thing, but part of the reason is to the ability to, so you as the parent, or you as the whoever, in this case, God on Yerushalayim, supposed to be able to let go. You can't hold it, right? Yeah, that's different. It's different. We'll talk about that one day. But right, and we know, like, for example, like, as parents, I mean, if you give a punishment sometimes, you can't stay, you got to move on. You can't continue, like, being angry with your kid. It's just not healthy. You won't be able to move on. You can't be stuck there. Because why? You have to maintain the relationship. So even though it seems that from all those radical actions and the punishment and everything, it seems that there's not going to be any slicha, there's not going to be any retribution, nothing, no forgiveness, no nothing. We see that in spite of everything, it's not the end of the relationship between God and Yerushalayim. After all that severe punishment, God is going to, so to say, like, calm down, כביכול, בשרה קנאתי ממך ושקטתי ולא יכעסות. I will no longer be angry. That's fine and dandy. Okay, but then what? Then becomes the real challenge, and every parent knows that. How you move on? How you move on with, because the relationship, like, and I use specifically that image of parents and children because that's God in Am Yisrael, God in Yerushalayim, whatever. Obviously, the city is representing Am Yisrael. We're stuck together. It's not, you can't divorce your parents. You can't divorce your kids. So no matter what, the relationship is going to continue. So you gave the punishment. Okay, you have to calm down. Now the real challenge starts. How you rectify it, how you move on. How you move on. And that's exactly what the Navi is going to do later. So now it seems that that's the end of the Nevuah, right? It seems that that's the end of the prophecy, right? We had a description of the sin. We had the punishment. We had the nechama. God will console. I'm not angry anymore. Seems that that's the end of the prophecy, right? But no. Goes back. Not only it goes back like in a different direction. Okay, let's take a look at verses 44 through 52. Now we're going to discover other relatives. You'll see what I mean in a second. 44, Mem Daled. הנה כל המושל עלייך ימשול לאמור כאימה ביתה, בת אמך את, גואלת אישה ובניה, ואחות אחותיך את, אשר גאלו אנשיהן ובניהן, אמכן חיתית ואביכן אמורית, ואחותך הגדולה שומרון היא ובנותיה היושבת על שמאלך, ואחותך הקטנה ממך היושבת מימינך סדום ובנותיה, ולא בדרכיהן הלכת, וכתועבותיהן עשית כמעט כת ותשחיתי מהן כל דרכייך. חייני נאום אדוני אלוהים אם עשתה סדום אחותך היא ובנותיה כאשר עשית את ובנותייך. הנה זה היה עוון סדום אחותך גאון שבעת לחם ושלוות השקט היה לה ולבנותיה ויד עני ואביון לא החזיקה ותגבהנה ותעשנה תועבה לפניי ואסיר את הן כאשר ראיתי. ושומרון כחצי חטאותייך לא חטא ותרבי את תועבותייך מהנה ותצדקי את אחותייך בכל תועבותייך אשר עשית גם את שאי כלימתך אשר פיללת לאחותך בחטאותייך אשר התאהבת מהן תצדקנה ממך וגם את בושי ושאי כלימתך בצדקתך אחיותייך.
Saying, my mother stole her daughter. You are your mother's daughter. You are your sister's sister. You were their husband. As if your mother was a Esau and your father an Ephraim. Your bigger sister is Samaria. She is her daughter who dwells your north. And your sister who is younger than you dwells to your south. Sodom and Gomorrah. If only who had gone in their way and acted like thereabout. It would have been a small sight, but you were even more corrupt than them all the day. As I live, the word of the Lord has been fulfilled. Swear that Sodom and your sister, she and her daughter, have not done as you have ordered. Oh, this was the sin of Sodom, your sister. She and her daughters had crossed the fight of bread and peaceful parade, but she did not stray to nothing. They were forty, and they committed an abomination before me. So I removed them in accordance to what I saw. And as for Samaria, she did not sin even half of it. So you have accused her abomination, who have vindicated your sisters with all your abominations. Now you too bear your humiliation that you have judged and forgiven your sister. Through your sin, by which you acted more upon them. They are more righteous than you. You too feel ashamed to bear your humiliation and your sister and your sister. This makes it.
Okay, no, good. So first of all, if you look at Pasuk Mem Vav, it says, Achotecha Gdola Shomron. We understand that your big sister is Shomron. Big sister meaning of Yerushalayim. Shomron, northern, right? Why? Because Shomron was the capital of the 10 tribes. Yerushalayim was only for Yehuda. This is 10 tribes of Malchut Israel. So we understand that Shomron was bigger than Yerushalayim because Malchut Israel was bigger than 10 tribes versus only 2. The Malchut of Yehuda. So that's number one. And here, basically, it says, it's not only that you followed your sisters, Shomron and Sodom, we're going to talk about that in a second, you were worse than them. And that's going to be something that comes up again and again. So first of all, Sodom, I mean, I get it. Shomron, I get it. Malchut Israel, that's the sister. I get it. Malchut Yehuda, Malchut Israel. That's fine. I get that. But Sodom, why Sodom is called a sister? Why Sodom is called a sister? Well, who is Sodom?
Ammon and Moab.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Ammon and Moab. Ammon and Moab, that's Sodom. Right? Because Ammon and Moab were born to the daughters of Lot. Lot, that's Abraham's nephew. Now, why do we go so much, back? Because Sodom represents for us the worst of the worst, right? We're going to talk about it in a second. And the Navi wants to make a point. You were even worse than Sodom. So that's number one. Number two, This is the idea here of going back to the origin of Yerushalayim. It says here, you're a Hittite and Amori. So if we're going to go all the way back to the beginning of the history, then it's not that far. Your origin, Yerushalayim, is not Jewish. Well, if we go that far, then also Sodom is also, if you're Jewish, then Sodom is Jewish in the same way. Because Ammon and Moab, that's Sodom. And by the way, they're called also family, even though we're not allowed to marry them, and it's a whole story by itself. But if you go all to the non-Jewish origin, go that far to Hittite and Amori, which is the origin of Yerushalayim, then also go to Sodom. Because Sodom, that's Lot, the nephew of Abraham. Okay, so now we understand also why the Nevuah started with Mechorotayich umoladetayich me'eretz haknaani avicha emori v'imech Hittite. If you remember, we talked about that last week, the beginning of the chapter, verse 3. We said, why are we talking about their homeland? What are we talking about? The origin, what is this? What's the connection? Now we understand that. Now it all makes sense why we go all the way to Mechorotayich and Moladetayich, like the origin of Yerushalayim, where this is coming from. So that means what he's trying to say, that the behavior of that deserted baby is an outcome of, call it DNA. It's part of her DNA. The people of Canaan, known for their abominations and all that, right? It's the Canaanites, the Chittim, the Amorim, all the Girgashim, Yechivim, Yevusim, all those nations, the 7 nations. And not only that, right? The pasuk, if you remember Sefer Vayikra, it says, "Ki et kol ha'toevot ha'el asu anshei ha'aretz asher lifnechem v'taki ha'aretz otam v'tama'achem otam," meaning that the land kind of puked out those nations because of the abominations that they did. Like the land, so to say, couldn't take it. Okay, fine. So they're known for their bad actions. The Amorim, the Chittim, the whatever, all those, the Canaanites. Well, that's the origin of Yerushalayim as well. That explains why, in spite of the good care that she got and was adopted and blah, 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 taken care of and all that kind of stuff, ended up doing what she did. It's the rationalization of the process. Oh, now I understand why you did something so bad. It's part of your DNA. There's, okay? And this is what, yes, Shoshana.
Does God not hold Jerusalem to a higher standard? Because when
That's exactly the point.
someone was started, it immediately went to Bamot.
Correct. But that's exactly the point. This is why it's so severe, because Yerushalayim.
He said it's less severe, or all of those were less severe.
That's what he's trying to say. We'll see that it's not exactly, it's not accurate. He's trying to make a point.
Okay.
He's trying to make a point.
I know he holds us to a higher standard.
Okay, but the point is, this is why he says, Ke'ima bita. He says, the fact that I adopted you, the fact that I took care of you means nothing.
He now seems sorry after the punishment, really. Because when he rationalizes it, he now says, well, maybe I was too harsh.
Maybe. But he says the adoption and the care were not able to completely remove, let's call it initial influences. Okay, now we learned that baby has 2 sisters, right? The big sister and the little sister. Shomron and Sdom. And everybody has the same parents, Chitim and the Amorim. Now we understand Sdom and we understand Yerushalayim, because Yerushalayim, we know it was a in the book of Judges, we learned that it was Ir Yevusi, and before, so we know it was not Jewish. We get it. Sdom, we know it was not Jewish. Fine. But Shomron? How that makes any sense? Shomron was a Jewish city from the very beginning. From the very beginning, if you look at the book of Melachim, you will see that the Jews actually built it. Asa was the king of Yehuda. Omri was the king of Israel. And he buys that mountain and he built that city. So from the very beginning, it was a Jewish city. So how can you say that Shomron and Yerushalayim have the same parents? So what I would like to suggest is he's not looking into the facts here. He's trying to make a point. He talks about the assimilation, the spiritual assimilation of the people of Israel, and of course Malchut Yehuda. And he said, your brothers in a spiritual sense, sisters in a spiritual sense. Okay? It's kind of radical, but it makes sense. It makes sense because he's trying to shock the system. He's trying to shock everybody. He's trying to, to make a point. Fine. Then he takes it another step. And he said, well, the behavior of Yerushalayim is even worse than the sisters, Shomron and Sdom. Again, that's not true. But he's trying to make a point. He's trying to make a point. The other prophets, when they wanted to make a point, they always used Shomron and Sdom as kind of like the example for the worst of the worst. So we know that Yerushalayim was not as bad as, but still, he wants to make a point. What else? There's another tendency here to minimize the sins of Shomron and Sdom and to kind of expand or highlight the sins of Yerushalayim. Remember, Sdom, what do we know about Sdom? The famous story with Lot and the angels. The people of Sdom wanted to rape those guests. Again, and now it says that the sins of Yerushalayim are worse than the sins of Sdom. And not only that, look at what it says. What it says about the sins of Sdom. The sins of Sdom, what? Oh, you're a wealthy city, and you didn't share your wealth with the needy ones. No, that's not what happened. Go back to the book of Bereshit. They wanted to rape them. Right. So we understand the overall what he's trying to do. He's trying to minimize the sins of Sdom and Shomron to make a point, and he's trying to highlight the sins of Yerushalayim. It's like, sometimes like I would talk to one of my kids, and like she would say, no, but my sister did the same thing. So, but you're trying to make a point. Like I'm talking to her, so I would say like, yes, but blah blah blah. Now, is it true? No, of course. When your sister did the same thing, is worse. It's not as worse, but it's as bad. But I'm trying to talk to you now, so I'm gonna kind of like minimize. I'm gonna say, oh, there were special circumstances, like whatever. She's older, she's younger, she's whatever, like whatever. It's all sorts of some in order to make a point here. I think he's doing the same thing. He's doing the same thing. Same goes for Shomron. Do we really think that the sins of Shomron, of Malchut Israel, were less than the sins of Malchut Yehuda? No. I mean, we know that in Malchut Israel, it was pretty much everybody, all the kings, everybody was wicked. In Malchut Yehuda, you had a couple of them that were okay. So again, it's this exaggeration in order to make a point. And why the whole exaggeration? Why is the Navi doing that? Why? It's because of that covenant, because of that special relationship that God has with the city of Yerushalayim. Because God chose to have the Shekhinah in Yerushalayim. Okay, if you go back to the mashal, to the parable, because that baby was chosen by God, it's worse than other women. Even if they did the same action, it's worse. It's like, I don't know about that. It's like, like the other day, my daughter came and she said, like, whatever they did, this and this in school. And I said, look, this is horrible. I said, everybody did that. I said, I don't care. I don't care about everybody. I care about you. Right? So when you have a relationship with somebody, it makes it worse. The fact that the other kids in the classroom did the same thing, it doesn't make me feel better. And that's the same thing here. What yechezkel is saying, the fact that Sodom is doing all that stuff, the fact that Shomron did all that stuff, it doesn't make it better. It's actually worse for me. Why? Because I have that special, God says, I have that special relationship with you, Yerushalayim. I chose you. You're my daughter. This is why it's so painful. Even if it's the same action. Okay? I can't. Let's spend 5 minutes because this is like horrible to finish with this. I want to finish on a kind of better note. There's a little bit of nechama here. So it's 5 minutes and we'll be done. 5 minutes. There are psukei nechama. Up until now, we did not find any nechama in the book so far. This is the first time we see it. So there's nechama for Yerushalayim, but also for Shomron and even for Sodom. And these are psukim 53 until 58. ושבתי את שביתיהן שבות, סדום ובנותיה ואת שבות, שומרון ובנותיה ושבות, שביתייך בתוכנה למען תשיח לימתך ונכלמת וכל אשר עשית בנחמך אותה. ואחותייך סדום ובנותיה תשובנה לקדמתן ושומרון ובנותיה תשובנה לקדמתן ועד ובנותייך תשובנה לקדמתכן, ולא הייתה סדום אחותך לשמועה בפיך ביום גאונייך, בטרם תגלה רעתך, כמו את חרפת בנות ארם וכל סביבותיה בנות פלישתים השתות אותך מסביב ואת זימתך ואת אהובתייך את נשאת נאום אדוני. פסוק נון ג' is and nun hey, one we understand. God will kind of restore those 3 cities. Bring it back. Maybe even like the people. Fine. Pasuk nun daled 54 says something interesting, that the restoration of Yerushalayim is going to cause it to feel ashamed. So even though the great betrayal, God is going to forgive Yerushalayim and restore the city, but then what happens? Yerushalayim is going to feel ashamed. Specifically in that point, Yerushalayim is going to be so ashamed that even Shomron and Sodom are going to come and try to console the city. And then Pasuk Nun Vav 56, go back to the rebuke of Yerushalayim and has kind of a rhetoric question. You were not aware of the punishment of Sodom? Didn't you see that? It's a symbol of all the bad stuff. So, and then it comes to, again, another section of console to Yerushalayim. That's the end of couple psukim, like 59 till the end of the perek. And so, yes, God is going to punish Yerushalayim, midah keneged midah, measure for measure. But after that, God is going to remember the covenant that he had with the city in the early stage, and it's going to be an everlasting covenant. Again, here we have this idea that the compassion that God is going to have for Yerushalayim is what's going to get Yerushalayim to have those feelings of guilt finally. And that's what you want, by the way, because otherwise the whole thing has no purpose. Exactly. But it's not only to remember for what? Correct. You have to remember. For what purpose? The covenant, but for what purpose? So it's not going to happen again. To heal, but it's also, there's an educational point, so it will never happen again. That's what you want when you give a punishment. You want that it's not going to happen again, hopefully, right? So, and that deserted baby, Yerushalayim, is going to become a mother, right? Obviously, it's a parable, and under its wings, going to be other cities. There's going to be other cities. It's not because Yerushalayim is going to make tshuva, but rather it's because of the compassion that God is going to have. But in spite of all that kind of stuff, we have to remember that this is like everlasting. It's this bond that cannot be disconnected. It's everlasting. Doesn't matter what happens, no matter how bad things are. It's not going to happen. But it's and God is going to redeem the city. Why? Because of the covenant. If the people of Yerushalayim are going to make tshuva at some point, it's going to happen when? After the punishment. If at all. And why? It's because of the guilt. And the guilt is going to happen because God, it's when the punishment is over and your kid realizes, oh, yeah, I did something wrong. So if that happens, then the guilt happens. Okay, so it's important to understand it's not because of tshuva, it's because of the relationship. That bond, it's that relationship. This is why God is going to restore Yerushalayim. But only then Yerushalayim is going to have that guilt that perhaps enabled tshuva later on. And that is going to be, by the way, a highlight. There's going to be like a motif that we're going to see in the book going forward till the end of the book. Wishing everybody a wonderful Purim next week. We're not. No class next week. I'll see you in 2 weeks. It's Purim, Tuesday. No, it's Monday night is the Megillah. Monday is Tanach Talks. Yeah. Yeah.
Will they have the Megillah on Zoom?
I don't think so.
No.
I don't think so. But
Mm.
but I will double check, Maxine.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't think so.
And I asked something about Megillah,
Getting there.
and I asked something about